So thank you very much. I'm honored to be invited to this conference. It's taking place in a unique situation in our history because the world, as at least never before in my lifetime, has seen this kind of a universal suffering, leading to a need for universal innovation and restoration and reimagination of a new future. So we should, as much as we are going through these difficult times, consider ourselves lucky to have been in this situation where questioning where we are today and stepping back and rebooting is a possibility for us, each one of us. And in my capacity as a researcher, an ethnographer, I get to talk to a lot of people around the world. And I do know that a lot of reflection is going on, a lot of self questioning is going on. And I have no doubt that if even a small fraction of this thinking and reflection that's going on turns into action, we will have a different future ahead of us. So I want to share my presentation based on some unique experiences I have had personally, also in conversation with my clients and with just random people on the street or on Zoom. And my hope is that this presentation will provoke you into thinking about design and innovation in a more sustainable and ethical way. I call my presentation Life, Imagination, and Design because that's a subtitle of a book I just published. And I was told, I am not making that claim, but I was told that this is the first book of poems written by a designer that has created worldwide ripples. And people have taken those poems and turned it into a variety of design artifacts or creative outputs. So that becomes a good way for me to participate in this process of change and provoke people to think in a new direction. So when I published the book, it was interesting because it was a very serendipitous event that happened one day in the middle of the night. I woke up and wrote my first poem. And then for the next 8 months, I continued to write. And then once the book was published, I sent my manuscript to one of my design professors from my foundation year at NID. And I said, I don't know why this happened. And I've never written a poem. And I was inspired to write this, and it's having a huge impact. So he gave me this rationale. He talked about a flower in the forest, and he referred to Iqbal's poem, which says, हजारों साल नरगिस अपनी बेनुरी पे रोती है, बड़ी मुश्किल से होता है चमन में दीदावर पैदा. In English, it would translate to, for years the bud languished in the darkness, unnoticed, unappreciated, until one day it bloomed into a flower, just when a maven was visiting the garden. So it's a coincidence of a bud blooming on its own, on the force of its environment, and someone who could appreciate it, internalize it, and create a moment with that synchronicity of the two events happening at the same time, created that moment of delight, moment of joy, and it got translated into, in my context, into a book. He said, what has been happening is for the past 45 years, as a designer, you have been observing life, you have been engaged with life with a designerly lens. You have been absorbing the good things in the environment. You have been interpreting and translating it in your subconscious as much as you're serving your clients. And it just happened that at the time when those internal influences that were forming like a bud inside you your conscious self was ready to appreciate it blooming into a flower. And that day when you went on a mountaintop and saw a feather flying by you, you recognized it as a metaphor that needed to be translated into a poem. So that gave me a realization during COVID 19 that we can help people discover the nuggets in our universe. We need to prepare them. Just I was prepared as a designer trained in design sensitivities to look at the good things, the harmonious things, uh, the synchronous things in the universe that could be combined and translated into poetry. We could get people to look at those finer things of life rather than looking at conflicts and pain and suffering and aggravating it. We could look at the things that can be combined to create a new form, a new life, and a new set of experiences in our universe. So that takes me to a proposition that designers must limit our role to serving as facilitators of purposeful interactions between people and conversations within communities. These interactions and conversations enhance the sensitivities of these people, the curiosities of these people to the finer things of life, the life that has the universe has to offer to us, the rules of the universe that make us more compatible and creative. And then we would discover that communities that are motivated to participate in synergistic, symbiotic, and sometimes serendipitous interactions will produce sustainable outcomes. We should not be designing for people, we should be participating in cultivating creativity within communities, and those communities will produce sustainable outcomes. This may sound like a philosophy, but this is a part of a business I've been running for last 22 years on the philosophy of helping teams turn into symbiotic relationships and creative engagements, and through them helping them discover the 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 needs, the aspirations, the dreams, the possibilities that exist within the environments that we want to serve with design, and get them to find purpose to address with their design actions. And therefore, my role in my company and in my practice has evolved not as somebody who designs for people, but somebody who becomes a bystander and a facilitator as people design for themselves. Hmm. So imagine these possibilities. Imagine the universe we can leave behind for our children and grandchildren if we actually start building communities that can perform creatively and sustainably without needing our engagement once they gain that momentum. There are enough examples uh, in this world where people have adopted communities. Right there in Rajasthan, we have Bunker Roy's project where he has taken indigenous skills and got people to develop sustainable solutions. Back in the days when I was at NID, IIM and NID had a Jawaja project where also they adopted a village in Rajasthan and helped use indigenous skills to develop products and solutions to support indigenous living. So I think as designers, what we need to do is we need to we moved from designing products to designing experiences, and now service design has become a big buzzword. But I'm really thinking is that designers need to participate as catalysts of community design, of envisioning community life and lending creativity as the resource that we can encourage within those communities to build a whole process of sustainable design. We can then become, we don't become the designers, but we become builders of scaffolds for imagination. You know, in the introduction, you said, I'm a ethnographer of social imagination. I do believe that, think of something like blocks with which we play as kids, Lego blocks. Those are just the pieces with which we unleash our imagination. Lego does not design what we experience when we play with it, but we create our own experiences. Each user of Lego builds their own experience using those blocks. Look at this child. She just has this sari as a swing, but you never know what she's imagining. Swinging in that sari, stuck on her door, she is beginning to feel different. She's flying, maybe she's thinking about the future, maybe she's thinking about a better life. So there are things that we can design that viscerally engage people in imagining possibilities and motivated to build and work towards creating those, uh, making bringing them to life. So what we become is, we become constructors of scaffolds for imagination. Can we build scaffolds where, just like a rainbow is an outcome of a chance encounter between sunlight and rain, we align these different forces in the world, just like, and so that a Nargis may appear, um, at the right time. We'll start looking at the forces of change that are appearing in our visibility, just as COVID has told us. People are seeking change, people are seeking, um, change from their own approach to life, their own purpose for life, and looking around for partners, looking around for platforms, looking around for enablers who can have them redefine their job, redefine their work, and redefine the work that they produce. And that, for that, we need people who have the strength of serving as facilitators, directing their energies, directing their imagination in a way that they recognize these forces in their environment and create something that's beautiful, that suits their context. So, where do we start? By becoming these cultivators of, again, this has become my mission since I wrote my book. I believe that we need to give design back to people. And in building these communities of creative communities of people who are going to design for themselves, we need to help build curiosity. A curious mind is a learning mind. A fatalistic mind, an angry mind, is not curious and is not open to receiving the most obvious things in the environment, the most mundane things that can lead to something beautiful. You know, Wordsworth looked at daffodils and wrote a poem that has become a legendary piece of literature. Um, we need to cultivate curiosity in people. We need to create compassion. I used to, until now, talk about empathy, but I think I find compassion even a greater uh, quality than empathy. If we can actually design with compassion, the kind of outcomes we would create would be more sustainable. And the last one is, of course, creativity. So if you look at curiosity, compassion, and creativity, what we would produce is, within a community of people who are not trained as designer, if they all acquire these three traits, what you have is a very forceful, dynamic community of people who are interacting with each other, having a dialogue with each other, using local resources, and coming up with something that's amazing, different, and relevant to their context, mindful of the things, the rules and the traditions and the cultural sensitivities of their environment, and not create something that is created by someone in the Silicon Valley, imposing it on somebody sitting in Mumbai or in Udupi or wherever that might be. and creating a homogeneous culture around the world. I think it's time for people to pay attention to what suits their requirements, what suits their context, what their culture, their traditions, and come up with something that moves them forward, not gets them stuck in the past. And that's why when I created this book, I decided that this book is going to actually my way of giving design back to people, to provoking them, prodding them, inspiring them, and seeing if they can take these poems and turn it into something else. Um, if you think of some of the poems that we learn as children in whichever language, in Marwadi, in Marathi, in Hindi, Urdu, whatever that might be, a lot of times as we grow up, the words remain in our memory, the tunes remain in our memory, the voices of our moms or grandmoms or dad, whoever sang it to us remain, or teachers remain in our memory. Very rarely do we care who wrote those lines. And those poems become a part of our growing up, our way of understanding and responding to life situations. I would like this. My purpose was to create this group of poems that bring design sensitivity into play and let people take it and make it their own and turn it into something else. I was surprised that it had a huge effect. And that was my way of creating sustainable design of people's imagination, of inspiring creativity in people who are not trained designers. And just as I'm seeing, it creates ripples. I have a few stories. This book of poems inspired one woman who is a music healer. She heals people with music. She took four lines from my a poem Pandemic and she sang it. She took a guitar and sang those lines, recorded it, sent it back to me. I was so inspired by that, I turned it into a poem, uh, into a video and sent it back to her. She was so inspired by the video that she hired musicians and re-recorded it professionally in a studio. And now we have a music video that came through this like to and fro ripple effect. There's another student of music at Carnegie Mellon University. He read my book, and for his next class, next semester class, he collected a group of students and they composed an a cappella music number based on my poem called The Universe, which is based on Charles and Ray Eames, which was inspired by Charles and Ray Eames' movie Powers of 10. He took 3 months to compose it and then he sent the recording to me. I was so inspired by it, I turned it into a music video. A third person who was a doctor, she said one of her sisters is suffers with narcissism and she doesn't listen to anyone, but she's going to give this book to her because the poems in this book sound like an inner voice. So she will at least talk to her own inner voice if she can't listen to anybody else. A fourth counselor from the Bay Area told me he was going to give the book to one of his patients who's losing his memory because these voices sound like a voice of a friend. And when he can't remember anything, he can't recognize his friends or family, he will recognize the voices within his head that were spoken through this book. And that would be his companion in his final days. These are the kind of reactions that I'm receiving. There is a initiative of British government, British Humanities Council called COVID and Poetry. They are collecting poems around the world that have had impact during COVID. They invited a Bay Area anthropologist to create a documentary on the impact of my book on the readers around the world. Now that video is also on the YouTube. So these are the different kinds of things that it is creating. And as you can see, I was so inspired by all of these reactions. I wrote a poem in reaction to the reaction to the poems. See another ripple effect. It says, I hope. So this was my message as a designer to the community that's going to embrace these poems. I hope you will hear your inner voice when you pause between the lines, hear music when you close your eyes, see a ray of light when it feels like you are lost in darkness, smell roses and feel a tender touch of a feather. Your heart will sing and feet will dance as you take a peek through a window for a home without walls. That's the title of my book. And this is creating like some of the people have literally, if you go to Amazon and read the reviews, half the people have said these poems create healing and hope during the pandemic. Another friend of mine, she's a coach, executive coach. I'm going to have a dialogue with her at the Pune Design Festival. She said, "You've set a revolution of consciousness." So all of these things are possible when you do this. Now we are left with 5 minutes. At the end, I'm going to play a video, The Universe, that was inspired. The poem was inspired by Charles and Ray Eames's film. Music was composed by the student of Carnegie Mellon, and the video was created by me. And that would be a good way for me to now let me see. So this is one of the last. I end my presentation with a quote from Geeta Mehta, a famous Indian author, author of the book Karma Kola. After reading my book, she said, "I turned to your book and found a healing silence, the weightlessness of a feather, a window in a house without walls, an atheist's concept of divinity. Thank you for your poems and the interior space they create." Geeta Mehta, author and documentary filmmaker. And just to keep in mind, she read this after passing away of her husband. And she sent me a message saying, "This was a great book to read after my husband passed away." So now let me give you, let me share the screen. Yes, thank you. It's exactly time for me to end my presentation. So,
Yes.
I,
Thank you so much, sir. It was really a wonderful session. In fact, I realized that it was 11:25 when you spoke. Otherwise, it was really a very nice session, conveying the message to the world to imagine the possibilities, becoming builders of scaffolds for imagination, cultivating curiosity, inculcate compassion, fostering creativity, and that too through a book of poetry titled "A Window for a Home Without Walls." Life imagination design is undoubtedly a unique way to communicate the message. Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful session. But we
thank
have
you.
few queries in a Q&A box, which I would like you to answer. Uh, there's one query from Professor Gustavo. He is asking you, kindly give your advice for us as teachers to inspire our students as you are inspiring us in this session.
Well, train people to surrender their ego. Do not train designers to become to design for people. Tell them, be curious, open your mind, don't be judgmental, and your life will be full of wonder.
Thank you so much. Another question is from an attendee. He is asking, thank you, sir, for your inspiring views. People who are creative, curious, and compassionate, but not designers, how can they get their ideas communicated and dreams materialized? Is there any platform where they can get connected?
uh, I think I would say a lot of designers in India I know have worked with communities of craftsmen, have worked with women, have worked with all kinds of marginalized sections. And I think the idea is a lot of times we misunderstand design as only design for corporates to sell more products and increase consumer spending. But that's only one part of design. I think what is really design is helping people believe in their own ability to craft their own lives. And I think we are all creative. You don't need to be trained in creativity. I remember Kapart, which does rural support for rural artisans, 25, 30 years ago, used to organize exhibitions in Delhi. And I was once asked to work there. Basically, I was telling these rural artisans, they were not even craftsmen, just artisans who made products like Jadu, um, how to bring their own sense of observing the people around them, their needs, their sense of aesthetic, and crafting something that's useful, but at the same time meaningful and beautiful. Those are the kind of platforms where we need to go out and help people to design for themselves and understand, make them understand that if you make design a part of your enterprise, you can actually enhance the value of what you create, get paid more, and have a more sustainable life also.
Very true, sir.